Welcome back to Ravenhawk Tech. In this video, we'll be covering getting your distributed switch set up in a vCenter environment. In this case, it's vCenter 6.7. I have two hosts, ESXi01 and ESXi02. I am not going to be setting up DRS or HA, vSAN, or any of that at this point in time. This is a pure, simple, just setting up your distributed switch and covering the basics of that. First and foremost, what you're going to want to do is actually create up your cluster. So I already have a data center here called Lab, and just to create that, just as a quick reminder, is to right click on your vCenter and say New Data Center. You can add additional hosts, vApps, and everything under your data center object. I'm going to then go ahead and say I'm going to create a new cluster. In this cluster, I'm going to keep things very simple for the naming convention. I'm just going to call it Cluster 01. And like I said, I'm not turning on DRS, HA, or any of the other options. Not for this video. Now inside my cluster object, I'm going to then add my hosts. Now my host can be added, like I said, under the data center object, but for the distributed switches and other objects that I plan to do in this video and with this lab environment, I would like mine in a cluster. So I'm going to add the host, and as you see here, I have the other host options open, and I just have the VM kernel set up. So there's no other VM networks or anything. I'm going to go ahead and choose my IP address for the first host, which is 6610 is the last third and fourth octet. And I'm going to then put in the username and password to the host. Hit next on the host summary. Now there's an evaluation license I have in my vCenter right now, and that is because I'm only doing the trial. I have not actually licensed this with an actual vCenter license. But when you buy your license, you also need to buy the number of CALs, or in this case, number of seats for your environment. So if you're going to have a 3 or 4 host environment for vSAN and additional redundancy capabilities and stuff, as well as standard enterprise, etc. For a 2-host environment, you can get away with the standard licenses unless there's certain features that you need. But for a for a vSAN and larger, you need at least 3 hosts. In this video, like I said, I'm just using my evaluation license. Please pardon any chirping that you hear as my cats are deciding they want to go ahead and make noises. Now, in this option, you have the option to lock down your host, so that way your remote users cannot log in directly to the host, and it requires that you use the local console through vCenter to communicate with the host directly. You can bypass that, which basically there is no lockdown at all. You can go ahead and do a normal lockdown, which is the host is only accessible through the local console or vCenter server, but not remotely accessible. And then you can do a strict, which is the host is only accessible through the vCenter server. Direct console UI service is stopped. So you can only do any type of service communication with the vCenter server, and that is all. I'm just leaving it disabled because I'm going to be wanting to be able to get fully into these hosts for now. And go ahead and hit finish. Now that's going to bring in your first host, and you'll go ahead and proceed to do the same steps to bring in your next one. Now that you have both of your hosts in your environment, you'll notice if you go to them and look underneath your networks, there's no virtual switches, there's no distributed switches there at all. No networking because there's no VM networks assigned. If you go under the configured, you can look to see, here's the vSwitch 0, here's your VM kernel adapters, physical adapters, and so forth. In your normal setup, you'd have the VM network. Mine, I've already deleted it to prepare them for creation into this environment. So that's why you'll see that there's no virtual switches currently. And if you go to my physical adapters, there's only one of these that currently has a wire hooked up to it. The other one, of course, is available. I am going to be trunking both of these together, so my two interfaces will be used for my management distributed switch. So let's get started with that. You're going to choose this fourth tab option, which is the networking tab, and you're going to right click on your data center group, and you're going to say new cluster, or excuse me, new distributed switch, which is under this tab here. There's a thing that says new distributed switch. Here, I'm going to give it the name management. I'm going to use the topmost because I don't have any other hosts that are 6.5 or 6.0 in my environment. I'm going to say that there's only 2 uplinks, and you can leave it as 4 if you wanted to eventually add more. I don't. I'm only going to have 2, so that's fine. I'm going to do that because what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually call that my primary, and I'll show you why here in a minute. I've created my management distributed switch and my primary group here, my primary switch. This primary is going to actually replace my vSwitch 0, which is the original host one, which is why I'm creating it. Now I called it primary because when I go to eventually set up the HA environment, I'm also going to create a secondary port group that is going to cover that interface. So for now, there's primary. Now I'm going to right click on management here and go ahead and say add and manage host. Now I am going to add host. In this case, I'm going to add host and manage host networking. I'm going to choose my host. In this case, I want both of these. I'm going to manage my vkernel adapters, and I don't need to worry about migrating virtual switch networking because none are configured, but you could if you had some. And then what I'm going to want to do is assign my uplinks. So I'm going to take both of these adapters on each of these systems and assign it to the actual switch. Alright, and then what you're going to do is just hit next once you get done doing that. Now these VM switches that are here, the vSwitch 0, like I said, what we're going to do is I'm going to assign it to a port group. I'm going to choose primary. Same with this one. And then just hit next. Once that is done, you'll notice, of course, that there is an uplink or network connectivity lost, and that's just simply because I changed the networking and I had disconnected them. Now you'll notice that as I refresh, eventually it starts to clear up. And if I left it alone, it would clear up on its own, but what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to acknowledge and then reset to green, which you can do either up here or down here. And just hit acknowledge and then reset to green. Now what that'll do is it'll force it to be clean. Unless there's a problem, which will make it come back, you can do that if you know what the issue was that was caused it. And that is getting it set up initially. Now, what you're going to want to do is, of course, go into your networks. You can see the distributed switch there. You can see your port groups, which in this case, these are your primary and your uplink. You can then come down here to the configure and look at your virtual switches. and you'll notice that there's management and vSwitch 0. You don't need vSwitch 0 anymore, so you can go ahead and just delete it. Alright, and that is the basics for distributed switch setup.